California allows black parents and activists to decide what students will learn about American history. Hint, American history will soon be named Race and Gender in America instead of history. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in California, where bad ideas abound, where black parents and only black parents are being asked how area schools can make their curriculum more diverse. And the answer? Let's change American history by stopping the teaching of it. Instead of teaching the history of America from founding to today, let's instead teach the history of America through the lenses of race, class, and gender. So history now is racial sociology. And the fact that they invite only one kind of parent to do this is really dangerous and shocking.
Well, this is happening at the Val Verde Unified School District, and they decided they're going to host a seven-part black-only event. True change begins when you demand it. So for 7 different sessions, they are allowing the parents to dictate essentially what's going to be happening with the history or lack of history teaching now for the students. So in the first meeting, the parents were able to, air all the grievances with what has been happening, kind of let it all out there, and they were able to explain what their lived experiences were. Okay, so we got that out of the way. And then in the second meeting, they were focused on putting those feelings into attainable goals and change. Wow, we're making progress here. Only 5 more to go. So according to, at least, the flyer, it says, after a deep dive into the feel of our community and the challenges faced within the district, it is time to evaluate and share with the cabinet and those in positions who can actually create change tailored to your collective needs and demands. Let's not sugarcoat what you need or want to see change.
See, this is the opposite of diversity and inclusion. What you're doing is you're telling these families, share with, and let me be very clear, moms and dads did not craft this bill. They are black activists who were as we know, black activists who were participating in the process. And what those black activists, not the black moms and dads, came up with was a situation where we're going to be completely exclusive. Let's forget the history of America, which is a hugely complicated task involving hundreds of different identity groups all across history. And let's make it about our lived experience as residents of the state of California in the year 2021. Let's reduce all American history to the very myopic views of certain racial minorities at a certain time in California and hijack the school system to be able to deliver that kind of learning only. In other words, let's familiarize our kids only with what they already know about their lived experiences, and let's forget the lived experiences of everyone else and the long arc of American history. Let's do that and call it progress.
So here's where everything kind of shifts over. So then the third meeting is where the parents were able to give suggestions about making changes to the curriculum and all the programs that are currently offered, and that's where we're going left for sure. Because all of these events had been organized by a man named Oliver Petty.
Activist.
A California activist. And so there actually, according to the Daily Wire, there was a teacher within the district who wants to remain anonymous. I wonder why.
Gee.
Because that teacher says the district is already putting these ethnic studies classes into what should be history class. And not only history class, 11th grade U.S. history and 10th grade literature classes. So you get it in your English, then you get it the next year in history, but we know it's been going on long before that. But the teacher had said that the district is changing the name, as you kind of mentioned, from U.S. history to race and gender in U.S. history.
Yep, and so let that sink in for a moment, if you will. We are hijacking history to make it the history of only black kids in the school district. I mean, this is what they accuse white people of having done, right? Appropriate every aspect of history and tailor it to these very nice pockets of suburban whites, which was never true to begin with. They were studying Howard Zinn's nonsensical socialist history text way back in the 70s, for God's sake. So what we're doing now is we're going to tailor this history to a very small minority group led by a black activist, get rid of history altogether and make it about more liberal politics, progressive politics, and import that beyond history classrooms into places like English classrooms.
And very specifically, this specific now race and gender in U.S. history course has 4 themes. They're going to talk about culture, barriers, social stratification, bias, and activism. And so when they focus on culture, the students are going to look at the nature of race, ethnicity, class, gender, language, societal norms, and values as methods for the development of a self and or cultural identity.
Now notice, not a word about history.
No history there. Second theme, focusing on barriers for certain racial groups and social stratification.
No history.
Students will explore how economic inequalities, and if you've been watching this week, we've talked about how it's all about economic inequalities now, and social stratification can lead to barriers and issues of unequal power within a society.
Not history.
And then the barriers and social stratification theme, it's going to ask the students, how do disenfranchised individuals resist against unjust societal norms and or laws?
Not history.
Protest.
And of course, it culminates in activism, which means that your kids are going to, the purpose of this class is not education, not a basic knowledge of the country before they try to change the country, and erasing of the history of the country so they can be focused and brainwashed into overturning its racist structures that they can't name and they can't possibly identify. And the whole purpose of this is ultimately activism. How do we take your kids in California and turn them on the street for the next Black Lives Matter riot and looting and larceny?
Well, really what that Valverde should be doing is getting in touch with NYU professor who says that, you know what? If you're black, you're not safe in U.S. schools. Not if you're black, hey, you may find yourself in some sticky situations or there may be some hardships. No. You're just simply not safe at all. This is coming from David Kirkland, who, just listen to his bona fides here, all his titles. He is a Vice Dean of Equity, Belonging, and Community Action. He's the Executive Director of the NYU Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools. And he's an Associate Professor of English and Urban Education. So he's Dr. Duke's best friend. So David Kirkland actually just decided to tweet out, because tweeting's what we do. And he tweeted out that he is basically scared for in-person learning. He says, it's not just about vaccines or COVID. If you're black, you're not safe in U.S. schools.
What exactly is the evidence for this? These kind of claims are divisive. You want to talk about fake news? You want to talk about news that leads people to hate, that possibly leads to violence? When you say things like that, as an academic, for God's sake, you're saying that to be black in America schools is to be in danger. How? Give us an example, just one. Just one. I mean, besides this ridiculous notion that because COVID picks on black people more than white people, going back to school is killing more black people. It's not happened. It's not something that is real. It didn't happen that way. So give us an example. And if you can't, where is Twitter? Where is Facebook? These statements are criminal incitement in some way. If black kids are in serious physical danger in our public schools and universities, tell us how, so it can be adjudged. And if you aren't going to tell us how, then man, you are doing something that if somebody who was of a different race did it, it would be the end of the ever-loving world.
Well, and that tweet was actually after a tweet he had already put out talking about how, like, he got word that, oh no, the education system, some schools might actually open. And he says, my biggest fear is that as we rush to reopen, nothing will change. He says those who are vulnerable will remain vulnerable. Wash, rinse, repeat. Nothing beyond that, just throwing out these blanket statements. And then he was asked to clarify his comments about especially if you're black, you're not safe in schools, and he had no comment.
Well, quite frankly, when it comes to that, wash, rinse and repeat
Wash,
is
rinse,
exactly
repeat.
what you do need to get rid of COVID, right? I mean, he's arguing that's a bad thing, but that's pretty good advice if what you're concerned about is the COVID. And literally, I know we use that word a lot in the Dr. Duke show because what he's doing actually, if that makes you happy, is he is making claims that are completely unsubstantiated, that are false. There is no epidemic of black kids being murdered or bullied in public schools. There's no evidence that at university campuses where African American kids are basically being told you can write the curriculum, as is happening in black school districts. We just saw this in California. You're welcome here, whether you're qualified or not. We will include you at the expense of achievement. We will find ways to allow you to tell us what monuments we're allowed to have, what sports mascots we're allowed to have, what you will and won't read in our history and English classes. I mean, if that's persecution, sign me up. How do I get on that bandwagon?
Well, I see in the whole long list of titles that he has, a statistician is not one of them, but he is supposed to be a professor of urban education and understanding, I would assume then, urban education. But what he fails to note is that how disproportionately affected the minorities have been because the schools have been closed. And so it's actually a worse thing that the schools are closed for those in the urban education.
You close the schools because of COVID, that hurts black kids. You open them because of, getting back to school, that hurts black kids. To be an expert on urban education is to simply be a one-note Johnny who says whatever happens in the public schools at all hurts black kids. And for that, he's making a big, fat vice chancellor, is it? Vice president?
Vice dean.
He's earning a big, fat vice dean payroll. That's not good work if you can get it. I mean, all you literally got to do is whatever comes down the road, that's racist, and that's racist, and that's racist, and
thanks, Oprah.
That's racist.
Oprah. So we have a story coming out of Virginia, which seems to be in the news more than it really should be, of a junior from St. Margaret's High School in Tappahannock, Virginia. Her name is Julia Seville, and she was admonished in a school-wide email from a classmate when Julia decided that she chose the racist, Candace Owens as her example for being a black trailblazer for Black History Month. Okay, so she was going to do a presentation, and she's like, you know what, Candace Owens, she's a trailblazer. And then the morning of her presentation, a student, a fellow classmate, sent out an email that went to everybody, every student, every teacher, every staff member. I mean, it's a small school, 107 students, but still, every single person got it in grades 8 through 12. And basically saying, how dare you choose that racist Candace Owens? Did you see the picture of Candace Owens? You know who Candace Owens is? There's Candace Owens. So according to the email, Candace Owens is not someone we should be recognized today, especially during Black History Month, when she has done absolutely nothing for the black community.
How about being a black woman?
Fact check.
How about being a black woman who becomes a conservative activist? How about that? That's something that you don't see every day in the black community. Being a pioneering voice for conservative black people, for Christian black people, for black people who don't just mindlessly hate this country, that's kind of a big deal. And it is pioneering.
This is true. Now, according to the story and what happened with the email and everything else, Owens openly tried to degrade the struggles. I say, of the black community by telling the general public that America is not a racist country and that everyone who believes that is trying to divide America. So you're telling me Candace Owens says that we're not a racist America? I can't believe it. I've been lied to all my life.
She's right. The average American on the street is not a racist. The average white person's not a racist. Racism is a complicated issue, but you've decided to just rename it. See, this is the thing. Everything's racist now because you changed the definition of race. Microaggressions and hurt feelings and not having the same socialist outcomes for your efforts, that's now racism. It's not. It never has been. But as long as you keep moving the goalposts like that, I guess we're going to be stuck with stupid stories like this.
Well, and here's the student's email also said that I feel as though not only was it disrespectful that Julia, you added Candace Owens to a list of trailblazers. It's offensive that you sat down, thought about it, researched her, and thought it was okay to do this. How dare you?
So some 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid.
Junior, 16, 17.
Gets to cancel everything.
Everyone. Yeah,
and to do it in such a childish way.
Yeah.
I'm going to email everybody in the entire school system that somebody has a different opinion than me. Celebrating a black person, by the way.
Yes, and of course, Julia is a chapter leader for her Turning Point USA chapter, and she actually joined her school's Black Student Union to help diversify her understanding of cultural issues, and for that, she must be canceled.
Yes, she must.
This went out to the entire administration, all teachers, everyone, and no adult in the room was in the room, and no one contacted Julia to be like, hey, Julia, are you okay? Or like, let's talk about this, or sit down with the student who sent the email and Julia. No, nothing. So Julia's family then, it was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, other stuff has been happening, so Julia is transferring schools.
And we've been told by the progressive left that this kind of electronic violence, this scapegoating, is the same thing as tar and feathering people, right? And there was no one there in that entire school, no adult who could say, you know what? The criterion was to nominate an African-American pioneer. The student did that. The fact that you don't like her pioneer is meaningless. And you're quibbling over legitimate blackness now. Right, you're telling this young one-punk kid is telling the entire school, I will decide what is effective blackness and what is not. No one dare argue with the 16-year-old with access to the press go button.
Well, and what's interesting, so Candace Owens wasn't even the only person that Julia had chosen for
So
Black
she was
History
one of
Month.
a number.
One of four. So the three other people that Julia was going to talk about was neurosurgeon and former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. You may have heard of him.
Well, let's talk about why he's not black. The left has been doing it for years.
Well, there you go.
Ben Carson is a sellout. Ben Carson abandoned his own people. How can Ben Carson go to work for Donald Trump? That means he's a racist. At least Candace Owens never worked for Donald Trump. Why is our little complaining? I'll tell you why. The little idiot child who complained doesn't have the vaguest idea who Ben Carson is. How much you want to bet?
That's quite
Who
possible.
are the other two?
Also, Supreme Court Justice
don't
Clarence
say
Thomas.
it. Don't say it. Captain pubic hair on the Coke can. She's too young to know who Clarence Thomas is. They singled out Candace Owens. Let this sink in for a second. This young complaining child singled out Candace Owens because of her high-profile social media presence. Things that Ben Carson and Judge Clarence Thomas don't spend a lot of time dandling in. And so this is their one example. I mean, if you want to get outraged, think about the leftist outrage, the greater amount of outrage directed at Carson and the Supreme Court justice. I got to know who the fourth one is.
Harriet Tubman.
Was that okay? Would that have been okay?
It would have been okay. What's interesting, something to note, is Julia is kind of like the same, not the same thing, but a similar type thing actually happened to Candace Owens. I'm reading her book right now called Blackout. And she kind of was propelled to fame in that way because back when Candace was in high school, she had received phone calls with messages alleging, racial hate crimes and all this thing because of something involving the governor's son, who was actually the one who left the hate crime thing. The whole thing got messed up. I think, was it the ACLU got involved, although Candace says she never even talked to him. Anyway, so Candace can totally relate to what now Julia, who just wanted to do a presentation for Black History Month about a trailblazer, she can relate to exactly what happened in her experience. It's kind of interesting.
Do we know if Julia is white or black?
White.
So she is white, and that we also want to make sure we add that there. So really, I guess my question would have been this. If I'm the young complaining student, am I really angry about the choices, or am I angry that a white person has an opinion at all? I mean, when you're going to given the incredibly politically charged nature of what's going on with the critical race theory in our public schools, why would you allow white kids to even answer these questions? If you're talking about cultural diverse of African Americans or African American heroic figures, why are you setting up your kids, your white kids, to fail? Nothing they can say is going to be acceptable because the fact of their whiteness. Why do you force this on them? On the one hand, you want to talk about how white people are the problem. On the other hand, you keep forcing them into situations with this new ridiculous curriculum, this race-based curriculum. You force them into positions where they can only embarrass themselves.
Well, it's time for some real education. And this week, it's all about William Shakespeare. And so we're going to take a look at what some of the world's heavy hitters at the time had to say about our friend Billy. And today, we're going to take a look at John Dryden.
Yeah, we are in Let's Hear About Shakespeare week because as you know, Shakespeare's on the chopping block. We have smug high school teachers all across the country arguing that replacing Shakespeare with Sandra Cisneros is a necessary thing for the lived lives of our student bodies. So Shakespeare is joining Pepe Le Pew and the Cat in the Hat now in problematic areas. So we're going to listen to what some of the greatest poets who ever lived had to say about Shakespeare. And this one is John Dryden. We've already looked at Ben Jonson, arguably one of the great playwrights of the 16th century, no doubt, 17th century. We've also got John Milton, the greatest epic poet to write in English. And now we have John Dryden, one of the great poet critics of the Enlightenment period. Here's what John Dryden had to say about Shakespeare. He was the man who of all modern and perhaps ancient poets had the largest and most comprehensive soul. What do all three of our poets have to say so far? His soul is comprehensive. His soul was capacious. His sensibilities were universal. That he writes things that people understand regardless, let me repeat this, regardless of race, color, gender, creed, religion. That what has been the hallmark of Shakespeare is once you can get kids past the language, which is by itself a useful teaching tool, right? Getting kids to be able to expand their vocabulary, read a more archaic form of English. But if you can get them past that reading barrier, kids of all backgrounds have been able to connect to something in Shakespeare. He, said Dryden, was the man who of all modern and perhaps ancient poets had the largest and most comprehensive soul. But Shakespeare's magic could not copied be. Within that circle, none durst walk but he. He was naturally learned. He needed not the spectacles of books to read nature. He looked inwards and found her there. This goes back to Ben Jonson, who at once famously reported that Shakespeare had small Latin and less Greek. He didn't go to college, we know. He didn't have those fancy schmancy educations what the elites of this culture had. He learned from studying nature, not necessarily from studying books. And that seems like the kind of message that modern American kids could resonate with. You don't have to have a college degree to be able to do great things. That's not a bad message to send. John Dryden is exactly right, and our woke scolds in the public schools are completely wrong, but we've been dealing with that for 50 years.
All right, just a quick reminder to please download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. We've got a lot of great content on the app, including our 17 new shows every single week. All you have to do is search Freedom Project and make sure to allow for notifications once you download it. And if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our Patriot Club, and we will send you our red signature tumbler. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. Now we want to take a moment to show some love to our Patriot Club members. Today we're going to give a shout out to Rafal from Berrien Springs, Michigan. Thank you for supporting us.
Hey, way to go, Rafal. And that wraps up this show for Freedom Project. I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, which means stay out of the public schools, my friends.